I'm Leanne Tran, psychologist who's worked with families whose kids don't fit the mould for almost 20 years. I've worked with children for decades, but I know parents are the real change makers when it comes to their kids. Having 3 kids of my own means I know it's not easy. Parent Like a Psychologist is all about simplifying how you support your kids with psychology information filtered through years of experience to take you from overwhelmed to confident. Come on in. Hi, welcome to another episode of Parent Like a Psychologist. I've been talking a lot about ADHD lately on the podcast and also in the programs for parents I've developed supporting your ADHD teenager and your ADHD primary schooler. So I feel like that's all I've been going on about, but in my work that I do with individual children and also with families, most of the time these children are autistic. And so lots of them have ADHD as well, but primarily autism is where I do a lot of my work. So I'm moving into talking about that in a little bit more detail over the next couple of episodes. And particularly today, I wanted to talk about this common question we have about whether autism is a superpower. I'm going to give you my opinion and talk about the nuances of the argument, one way and the other. Short answer is, I guess, no, I don't think that phrase autism is a superpower is correct. But I'm setting the scene, I guess, by having talked about ADHD. I'm going to talk about autism in a bit more detail, and I have lined up some really exciting guests to be on the podcast over the next probably 6 months or so. And a lot of those people have children who are autistic and have ADHD, one or the other. And a lot of those people are autistic or ADHDers themselves, because I think it's really important to listen to people who have lived experience in this area. And that's something that I don't have. I live with ADHD in my family, but I don't have it myself. So I don't have that lived experience of, firsthand experience. So I'm going to talk a lot about these different conditions, so ADHD, now autism, and then we'll get some real experts in to give me their perspective, and I'm so excited to be able to share those things with you. But for today, the first thing, I guess that today's topic is autism a superpower? My short answer, I guess, is no, because I think it's really a lot more complicated than it seems to be on the surface. We are moving in society in general, and definitely in terms of allied health culture, into viewing autism as more of a difference of presentation, a condition, a brain type, rather than a disorder with that negative connotation. And that I wholeheartedly agree with. But I think that the real overarching challenge is that as a society, our expectations, although we're a lot more understanding of difference, our expectations for the most part are set up for typically developing people. And while we still have those expectations, I think people who are autistic are going to struggle in certain areas. So let's get into a little bit more of the both sides of the argument. And then I'm going to wrap up by talking about how we see disability or difference in general sometimes in a bit of an unfair way. So autism as a superpower, I think the idea comes from that neuroaffirming approach of looking at the positive characteristics that lots of people with autism have. And I agree with that. The first thing is unique strengths. So autistic people can often have exceptional skills and abilities in certain areas. It could be attention to detail, deep focus, exceptional memory. And sometimes autistic people have really special skills. The word's not coming to me at the moment, which is awful. I should know that for this podcast. But, incredible kind of prodigy-like skills in certain areas. Those things can definitely be strengths. They can be in particular areas of learning or skill. So it could potentially be art and things like music or visual art. It can be in areas like science or technology. So where somebody's personal interests and their really high level skills combine to make them incredibly good at what they do in that area. People with autism are often known to as having innovative ways of thinking about situations. So they might approach problems differently, be able to think outside the box and come up with innovative solutions. And those unique perspectives can give insights that neurotypical people often miss. It's because of seeing things from that different perspective that can lead to some really great innovations. Another area is hyperfocus and passion. So that really, lots of autistic people have areas of interest that they are very passionate about. And because of that passion comes a hyperfocus. So it means being able to focus intensely on their interests, passions, and that leads to really deep expertise in those areas. They can also become really highly accomplished professionals, or, I guess even, well, mostly it's professional. Sometimes it might be in terms of achievement in a hobby kind of sense, but really with high level achievements and expertise. And there are often examples of famous people in history or things like that, where I'm thinking history, like Albert Einstein and Thomas Edison often are said to have been most likely autistic. Sometimes it's people in modern day times like Elon Musk. And so people who are believed to be on the spectrum have been able to highlight how, when there's these really strong passions, as well as keen interest and skills in the area, that they can really excel. I think that really highlights how we are shifting our focus more to strengths of being autistic, rather than the traditional model, which saw any difference as some kind of deficit. It's really not the case anymore. I think, though, if we just think about autism as being a superpower, then there's a few areas that get overlooked by that argument. And the first thing is that there are daily challenges experienced by lots of autistic people. But probably the biggest thing is that there is lots of variability between autistic people as well. So you may have heard this idea that we don't really talk about autism as a spectrum on one scale anymore. It's more like a wheel that has spokes that are in or out depending on a person's preferences and strengths or challenges in the area. So all people with autism are different, and they have a different pattern of strengths and challenges. And so what might feel like a superpower for some people might be experienced as a real struggle for others. And so that could be potentially, imagine someone who's an artist and feels a lot of things and is able to harness that in their art or music, whereas people may feel a lot of things, but that's an incredible challenge for them through their daily life. So I think, firstly, autism is not a one-size-fits-all presentation, which means that to say it's a superpower, we can't really say that it's a superpower if we're acknowledging that everybody with autism is different, with a different pattern of strengths and challenges and uniqueness. And so what might be a strength for someone is not a strength for somebody else. I think then that leads into where those daily challenges are. Sometimes, while there are strengths, there are some significant challenges autistic people face, and those are things like sensory sensitivities, communication differences that make it really hard to be in a neurotypical world, and one thing is difficulties with executive functioning as well. And that is an area that makes it, in case you haven't listened to many of my musings on this topic, executive functioning is about the ability to for the brain to organize itself to get things done in the moment. And so if that is a challenge, that can affect autistic people from carrying out any of the things they want to do. And that means that is a daily struggle that makes life harder for autistic people than other people. And so I think then to treat it as a superpower denies that daily difficulty that lots of autistic people experience. I guess what it comes down to too is that autism is not universally positive, and so labeling autism as a superpower can invalidate the experience of people who experience these hardships, and daily challenges due to autism. So it can gloss over the need for supports and accommodations. I think support and accommodation then comes into the last point I want to make, which is about society's expectations. And so lots of times those supports and accommodations are needed because of the mismatch between the autistic person's way of doing things and the society that they're living within. And if we have, so it's partly society's, I don't want to say fault, but it's kind of fault. It's partly that the society is the way it is, that autistic people struggle with things. And so then I think it's really unfair for us to then put on top of that this expectation that it's a superpower, so they are going to do extraordinary things. And that puts extra pressure on autistic people who are already finding it difficult because of the expectations we have of them. And then if we, on top of that, expect that, kind of ignore those difficulties that society's created and expect autistic people to be awesome at everything they do and with no challenges, then that's incredibly unfair. So you can see that that's why my answer to the topic is no. And it's not because I think autistic people have superpowers for sure. But they're not just one thing, and they will, all people have strengths and challenges. All autistic people have strengths and challenges. Autistic people probably do have superpowers. Maybe not all people identify that way, but even the ones who do potentially have things that are difficult for them as well, day to day. So I think it's a great move towards seeing people who are different as equally valuable and worthy of achievement and praise and recognition. But at the same time, I think we've got to understand that we still expect everyone to fit into this one mold, which means there will be challenges for autistic people. I think another point I wanted to make is about the diagnosis of autism or identification of autism. Before I talk about those expectations we put on people with differences or disability in more detail. I know that, I have talked to people, autistic adults who prefer the term identification rather than diagnosis for autism. And I can see that point for sure, because it's about identifying difference rather than a diagnosis, which, has that connotation that it's something negative, really, or wrong with a person. And they see it, those adults that I've talked to, as a identity rather than a clinical diagnosis. The difference for me is that when I do this work with children as part of identification, all of our systems are linked to a diagnosis, which means we use diagnostic manuals that talk about autism in ways that describe the characteristics, but then also talk about the impact that those characteristics have on a person's functioning. And for me, that is it's a distinction, because if we're just describing characteristics and things like that, then that's personality, and temperament, and wiring, and who someone is as a person. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We're all different in a way. Well, we're all different, but I think typical people are different to autistic people, who are then all different as well. So yeah, there are a billion different ways to be a human, I guess, is the point of that. But when I'm making a diagnosis of autism, part of the criteria is that those challenges are affecting functioning day to day. That's what makes the difference in my mind between personality and a person's who they are, their identity, and almost, well, I guess it's disability, because things are affecting their ability to function every day. That's not to say that the difficulty functioning is because of the autistic person. Lots of times, like I mentioned, it's because of the mismatch between normal societal expectations of normal and typical versus autistic ways of doing things. But I think what it highlights is that difficulty day to day that people are experiencing. So I think it's really important to affirm neurodiversity. I don't think we need to go by a deficit model anymore, but I definitely think the idea of autism being a superpower is kind of undermined by the fact that being autistic in lots of cases is affecting a person's ability to be able to live their daily life in this society that we have. And that impact on a person's functioning day to day is what means that there are supports and accommodations required. So that means that autistic people should be able to access support that helps them to live the life they want to live. And they should be able to expect accommodations from people, which means, adapting how society does things to make it more accessible for autistic people. I think then the last point I wanted to make was just, I guess, how this part about the superpower part is part of this bigger approach to disability, where we see people in a binary way of either being people who we should pity or feel sorry for, or people who are amazing with superpowers. The pity narrative happens with people with lots of different abilities, like autism, or also physical disabilities as well, where they might be seen as less capable, in need of sympathy, which is really kind of disempowering, but also quite reductive. It sees people as not a strong version of themselves, with perceived limitations and that kind of thing. The other extreme is we often want people to be inspirational, and we put them on a pedestal for being superhuman, or for being, really inspiring to us because of what they do. And it can seem positive, but it also kind of creates these unrealistic expectations and pressures, and reduces a person's complex nature into something extraordinary that doesn't focus on their day-to-day struggles, as we talked about before. I have seen this ever since probably 20 years ago in my first position at the Cerebral Palsy League in Queensland, and working with people who had cerebral palsy, and then, seeing any kind of, maybe it's a little different now, where there's definitely more representation of people with disability now, but back then too, the only times you might see people with cerebral palsy in a news story is when they were doing something that's kind of defied the odds of this or that, or, and there was this understanding from us who worked there and knew a lot of these people with cerebral palsy about they're just, almost like they weren't, society didn't see them for just being able to live a regular life, and achieving the things they wanted to do in their career and with their family and that kind of thing. It's almost like they had to be awesome to get any of our airtime. And I think that's, again, just that when we think about that in terms of the autism as a superpower thing, I think it's just a really unfair way to see people. And a lot of people would feel not seen by that narrative. So for me, I think there's a lot of a need for balance out there. So to recognize the person as a full person, and we can shift towards acceptance and of neurodivergence, and all of those things are positive. But I think we've got to acknowledge that it is harder for autistic people in our world. And that has, the reason that's important is because it helps people be seen, but also there are impacts on mental health for autistic people if we're constantly expecting them to fit in and succeed and excel, and not going out of our way to support them or accommodate what we do for them. I think that's really our job as professionals and as a society to do that stuff. So that's why I think we need to not see autism as a superpower in that really simple, reductive way that takes, it almost gives us an excuse to not do anything differently. So that's my short answer, I guess. I think people, autistic kids that I work with and their parents and, adults I've talked to, they definitely have some superpowers, and some people have incredible areas of talent and strength, and some people not so much, kind of like me. I don't have any particular amazing skills, and that's okay. But it's all about acknowledging people as the complex beings that they are, affirming and accepting that, and doing what we can to make that daily life easier. So maybe that's given you things to think about as a parent about your expectations, and maybe it's given you a bit of a way of perhaps advocating for your child, or knowing maybe some of the answers or things to say when other people mention this superpower idea. Next time, like from here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the specific areas of challenge or also strength in autism, so that we can unpack the differences a little bit, in depth. So I'll talk about all of the different areas on that circular kind of graph about autism and what it looks like to be on one end or the other. And I'm really interested in the guests coming up to give their own perspective about this, both from the parenting point of view and also the individual who has been a child and then, grown into an adult, so that they can share with us their, as perspectives of being an autistic child or an ADHD child, so that we can really understand that as parents. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope you are as well. And I will chat with you more soon. Thanks again for joining me. Thanks for listening to this episode of Parent Like a Psychologist. If you found it helpful, please share on Instagram so other parents can benefit too, and tag me at Leanne Psychology so that I can say a big thank you. Head over to leannetran.com.au to join the village for bite-sized psychology tips straight to your inbox. I really hope this podcast has brought a new perspective and you a step closer towards a calm parent and a thriving child. Have a delightful day.